Everyone says you are complicated, difficult to read, hard to reach, and you have spent years wondering whether they are right. But here is the question worth asking. What if everything they call a secret about you is not something hidden? What if it is something they simply do not have the architecture to see? Welcome to Power and Myth. The word Sigma has become something of a cultural shorthand. It tends to mean solitary, unclassifiable, operating outside the hierarchy without quite belonging to the rebellion. When people apply it to INFJs, they usually mean something like the introvert who is also intimidating, the empath who is also unreachable, the one who cares so deeply and yet somehow remains untouched at the center. This is not wrong. But it is not a description. It is an outline with nothing filled in. And you have probably spent a significant portion of your life feeling like an outline, correctly traced but never fully seen. The common frameworks for understanding, you tend to reach a certain depth and stop. They will tell you that you have strong introverted intuition, that you process the world inwardly before you ever speak, that you are oriented toward meaning and pattern rather than fact and surface. This is accurate. They will tell you that you feel things at unusual depth, that you absorb the emotional states of those around you without entirely meaning to, that this makes ordinary social environments quietly exhausting. Also accurate. They will tell you that you are paradoxical, intensely warm and yet fiercely private, deeply loyal and yet capable of complete clean severance, idealistic and yet unusually clear-eyed about human failure. Yes, all of that. But none of it explains why. None of it tells you what is actually happening beneath the surface. None of it gives you a name for what you are carrying. What the surface explanations miss is that every apparent paradox in the Sigma INFJ is not a contradiction, it is a function. Each of those qualities that look strange from the outside is, in fact, the visible symptom of something ancient operating underneath. This is what we explore here, the ancient patterns beneath modern personality. The first thing only a Sigma INFJ truly understands is that their silence is not absence. When you go quiet, people read it as withdrawal, as coldness, as punishment sometimes. But for the Sigma INFJ, silence is not a pause in communication. It is the communication. It is where the actual work happens. The knee-dominant mind does not process at the surface, it processes in the dark at depth over time, away from the noise of other people's expectations. The silence is the cognitive chamber. Without it, the signal degrades. Ask yourself, when was the last time you had a genuine insight whilst surrounded by people? Now ask when you tend to have them. This is not introversion, this is introverted intuition, requiring specific conditions to function. The second thing you understand, and almost no one believes when you say it, is that you saw the ending before anyone else arrived. This is the Seer burden, which Jung documented in his studies of knee-dominant cognition, the capacity to perceive pattern convergence before it becomes visible to others. You knew the relationship would fail before the first argument. You knew the organization was crumbling before the public announcement. You knew the person would leave before they knew themselves. And you said nothing, or said something and were not believed, and watched it unfold exactly as you had already seen. This is not intuition in the casual sense people use that word. This is Cassandra's gift. Precise perception with no mechanism for proof. The third thing is this. Your detachment is not cruelty, it is precision. When a Sigma INFJ disconnects from a person, a situation, or a version of themselves that no longer holds, it is not performed and it is not impulsive. Something in the nigh-dominant architecture simply recategorizes. What was open closes, not from rage, not from indifference, from a kind of profound, energetic accuracy. The exile archetype, which is one of the 7 INFJ archetypes this channel explores, understands the necessity of permanent thresholds. The exile does not return to the village that cast them out, not from bitterness, but because they have become someone the village cannot contain. The fourth secret is the one that disturbs people most, including you. Your influence is real, and it operates whether or not you consent to it. People change after spending time with you. They re-examine things. They become unsettled in ways that eventually prove useful. You do not do this deliberately. You do not have a method. It happens because the Sigma INFJ carries what Jungian psychology calls symbolic compression, the ability to communicate meaning at a depth that bypasses the ordinary rational defenses. When you speak from your actual center, it lands in people differently than they expect. This is not charisma, it is resonance. And the reason it frightens you is that you've spent enough time misusing it, or having it misused, to understand its weight. The fifth thing is that your empathy is not what people think it is. They assume empathy means feeling what others feel, dissolving into the emotional weather of a room. And you can do that perhaps more readily than most. But the Sigma INFJ's actual gift is not absorption, it is witness. You feel what others feel, and you do not disappear into it. You hold it, examine it, and give it back transformed. This is the wounded healer archetype, Chiron, whose wound did not destroy him but became the precise source of his healing gift. The empathy that appears to be sensitivity is, at depth, a form of sight. You see the wound beneath the behavior, you name the grief beneath the anger. This is not soft, it is surgical. The sixth thing only a Sigma INFJ truly understands is that their solitude is not rest, or not only rest. The hermit archetype, perhaps the most fundamental structure in the Sigma INFJ's psychological architecture, does not withdraw to recover, though recovery occurs. The hermit withdraws to do work that cannot be done in company, to descend, to integrate what has been perceived but not yet understood, to find the pattern that has been forming in the dark for months before it surfaces as knowing. When that process is interrupted by the expectation that you should be present, social and available, you are not being asked to come out of your shell. You are being asked to stop mid-surgery. The lantern must go into the dark alone. That is not a metaphor. It is a description of how need-dominant cognition processes unconscious data. The seventh secret, and perhaps the one that takes the longest to recognize, is that your deepest struggle is not with the world's misunderstanding of you. It is with your own. Every Sigma INFJ carries, at some level, the belief that the things which make them who they are constitute a problem to be solved, that the perception is too intense, the attachment too total, the disconnection too final, the silence too long, the empathy both too much and not enough. You have been given frameworks that treat these as symptoms. What Power and Myth offers instead is the archetypal lens. These are not symptoms. They are functions. The question is not how to moderate them. The question is whether you understand what they are actually for. None of this is mysticism. These are Jungian archetypal structures, patterns that Jung identified in human consciousness across cultures and time, and which map with unusual precision onto the nigh-dominant INFJ psyche. The archetypes are not supernatural. They are descriptions of psychological configurations that recur because they are structurally real. What changes when you understand this? Perhaps not the circumstances. The world will still misread your silence. People will still be unsettled by your perception. You will still feel the weight of seeing things you cannot yet prove. But you will know what you are carrying. And knowing what you carry is not a small thing. It is the difference between a burden and a task. What did this open for you? Was there a moment in this video where the common explanation you have been using broke down and something closer to the truth became visible? Tell me in the comments. This is how we do it at Power and Myth, not by telling you what to think, but by going deeper together. Subscribe if you want to keep asking the questions that actually matter. Until next time, find your power, know your myth,